Welcome, everybody. Hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Bergman, and I am here to introduce this next panel. And I first want to thank the sponsor of this panel, which is the Family Equality Council, of which I am on the board, which is how I got the honor of introducing these wonderful panelists. Family Equality Council is the only national organization dedicated to equality for LGBT families through advocacy, education, and support. For over 30 years, we've been supporting our families through community-based events as well as political advocacy. We've been in the White House. We have a long, long list of accomplishments, and I encourage you to look at our website at familyequality.org. And there are also many, many parent resources that you can download for free that are really quite handy. This workshop is called Conversation About Adoption and Creating an Adoptive Family. And I'm going to just introduce the speakers, and I'm going to let them then speak for themselves. This workshop is not really going to be a panel discussion. It's really going to be a conversation among friends, and they're going to share their experiences with you. So I'm going to start at that end. We have Dan Bucatinsky, plays James on ABC's Scandal, and an author of a really super amazing new book called Does This Baby Make Me Look Straight? And it's really a very, very fun book. And a little,
just in case that's what.
And a little personal aside. Dan is a huge supporter of the Family Equality Council and has been integral in our programs and in our events and our media, and we really do appreciate that, Dan. Next to Dan is Shonda Rhimes, award-winning screenwriter and producer, and next to her is Dan Savage, writer, TV personality, and activist. And I'll leave the rest to you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to our conversation. I'm going to pretend that we're just talking amongst ourselves, and you guys happen to hear it. Now, this is kind of a dream for me because I honestly have gotten so much inspiration from both of these two people sitting next to me and have had the joy of being able to call them friends and call them colleagues. And interestingly enough, what ties us together in many ways is a common experience, that of adoption. I'll use the word inspiration a lot today because for me, what's so important when talking about the stories of adoption is exactly that, is being 100% honest and open in talking about the paths I took to become an adoptive parent. And in doing so, you wind up meeting other people, and they wind up inspiring you, and it becomes like a little chain letter, I hope. I hope that's what happens. It's certainly what happened for me. My partner, my husband and I, it's hard to say that because it sounds like weird. But anyway, my husband and I were not necessarily going to become parents when we first met. We talked about being parents. We talked about surrogacy. We talked about adoption. My husband felt like he would be ganged up on if we went the route of surrogacy, that the baby would definitely be mine biologically and he would be left out in the cold. And, that obviously was his fear, and it might have been true. But there are so many children born every single day, and both internationally and in this country, who are in need of families, who want families, and so many people who want to become parents, that the notion of adoption being an option or the option was something that was compelling to me. And but even before we had made the decision to even take the plunge, Don and I had read Dan Savage's book, The Kid. He's written many books, by the way. I love all of them. They're all amazing, and all of them sort of expand on this idea of an openness and honesty when talking about family and relationships and sex. But this particular book, The Kid, really chronicled in a way that I thought was so groundbreaking. It was so honest and brutal and funny and self-deprecating, and took us through the roots of how he and his partner sort of, you didn't fall into it, but it was the way in which you managed.
No, we got drunk one night and adopted by accident. Woke up after a bed and there's paperwork everywhere.
See, it happens just like for everybody
right.
else. It's the same thing. So, but reading somebody else's story, and even how they question it, and how they stumble through the relationship with a birth mom, and how the notion of open adoption was so new back then, and the idea of being chosen by a birth mother or a pregnant young woman who wants to be involved in the decision as to where that baby's going to go. The book was so inspiring to us. It was a huge part of what made us make that next step. And we did, and we went through the routes. Years later, we went through all of the different channels. And several years after that, and I have two children now, 7 and 5. I had the pleasure of not only working on Grey's Anatomy, which is a show that you probably have heard of, that Shonda created, but also getting to play this amazing role on Scandal. And we were at your house at a screening, and Shonda and I started talking. We've always sort of had this weird connection about about kids and our love for babies and about adoption. And Shonda, I said, what was the thing? Well, like, what inspired you to adopt? And one of the things she said was Dan Savage's book, The Kid. And I almost dropped my coffee. I was like, what? Really? Like, for whatever reason, I was so surprised that such an intimate story, because it is. It's so personal and so specific and felt so relatable to me, actually has such universal themes and ability to inspire. So anyway, that instantly brought John and I together, and luckily we've been able to work together and talk about our baby fever, which never seems to go away. But to me, this is sort of a dream of being able to bring together 3 inspiring. I also want to talk later on a little bit about how creatively we use the medium of television and writing and essays and the books that we write to talk about our stories. But before I do that, I sort of thought I'd give you guys an opportunity to just talk about what was that thing. I'm always thinking about the first step. Like, what was the thing that led to the adoption?
I was this kid who always knew they were going to adopt. I was never quite sure I was going to get married. Like, the idea of getting married was always this fake. I was always like, maybe I'll just take a lover. Like, I was like, my husband will live next door, or something like that. I really was that girl, but I was always like, I'm going to adopt a ton of babies. Like, I always sort of thought that was true, even when I was younger, to the dismay of my mother, who was like, please get married, and all these other things. And so I never really thought of it as being something that was going to happen anytime soon, but it was this thing that was sort of always in the distance. And I did. I found your book, and I read it like 5,000 times, and I gave it to all my friends who were talking about having kids. I was like, you've got to read this book. And then one year I went away to Vermont to, like, I don't know, I rented this little house in Vermont, and I was going to write and sort of gaze at my navel and think about, I'd broken up with somebody, and think about this boy that I'd broken up with and how terrible he was. And he was. And he was. Terrible.
Awful.
And I arrived there,
This is why you need gay friends for moments like that. We know just what to say.
She's got
like
2
that.
gay neighbors right now. It's going to work out really well.
I feel so happy right now.
Oh, girl, he was bad.
He was terrible.
You were too good for him.
I'm glad he's gone. I meant to tell you the whole time.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, I rented this house in Vermont, and I arrived there, and it was this lovely little thing in this adorable bucolic setting, and it was all very lovely. And the next morning, 9/11 happened. And so I was trapped in the middle of nowhere, and I thought the world was going to end. And I had no way to get home, because of course I thought, we were never going to get on planes again.
Yeah.
Like, you really did, it was a moment in time when you really thought the world was over. And I remember sitting there that day thinking, if the world is going to end, then there are all these things I haven't done. And at the top of my list, it was adopt a baby. And I was 31 years old at the time, but I was like, if the world doesn't end, I am adopting a baby. And the world didn't end, and I went home, and I hired an adoption attorney, and 9 months and 2 days after 9/11, my daughter was born.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was that simple, and that complex, and that weird, and that
Affirming. Life
yeah,
affirming.
normal for me. Yeah, it was the most optimistic thing I ever did. And then I had a bunch of shows in the middle, because it's very hard to think about having more children when you have one show and 30 actors. And then one day I woke up and I thought, it was sort of 9 years later, and I thought, oh my God, I haven't had any children because of my job. That's really bad. And, I talked to you about this. I was very obsessed with this and very unhappy. And I adopted another baby last year, and so I have a 10-year-old, and she just turned 11 months old, and an 11-month-old.
Who I'm obsessed with.
And she's pretty amazing. They're both pretty amazing.
They both are.
And it's kind of perfect. That's my story.
Now, your story is so different, and as you know...
And my son is 14, and it ain't perfect anymore. Just throwing that out there.
I know.
The teen years are coming.
I kind of love this idea
scared
that,
of
like,
that,
we're
yeah.
still in the kind of baby phase, although mine's sort of ending also, as my kids absolutely refuse to do anything that I say.
Yeah.
But anyway...
Oh, it gets worse.
I'm sure...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the next campaign,
Yeah, right.
No, but I'm curious as to, like, what's changed and what happened back then and what were the germs of... You even talked earlier today, we were chatting about this, and you said how, you know, it happened very quickly.
It did, ironically. You know, when I met my husband, Terry, that's how I get around that partner-husband awkwardness. I just call him husband.
you say
I spell it with a Z, and I feel more comfortable.
And you say it with a
saying
southern accent, too.
Yeah, my husband.
Like my husband, like you're carrying a rifle.
My husband, Terry. When I met him, I was about to be the sperm donor for a lesbian couple. I was going to be the glorified babysitter uncle dad, right? And I was fine with that. I was single. I was 30. I kind of was really, I liked kids. I always wanted kids. This was a way for me to have a kid without having the responsibility of single parenthood, which I don't think I could have done. And I admire you greatly for taking that challenge on. And so when I first met Terry, I was like, oh, you need to know that if you're going to date me, like about a year from now, there's going to be a baby and I'm going to be involved. And he's like, I love kids. And then the lesbians went into deep lesbian process, frozen in amber zone.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, and they were just, and they ended up breaking up. And we this
Shocking.
huge, yeah, I know, this huge process.
No.
Sorry.
Not that there's anything wrong
Those
with that.
lesbian relationships are really unstable. A gay man get, I'm just kidding, just joking.
We're all unstable.
And so we were at a friend's house, and we knew these friends had 2 adopted kids and a bio kid of their own. All their kids are their own. They had one that was their own biological child. And we were telling them what we were about to do, because we'd moved on to another lesbian couple that had asked us to be sperm donors, asked me, there's something about my sperm, I don't know.
Yeah.
A next door neighbor asked us to be sperm donors.
I was going to ask you to be a sperm donor, but...
Were you?
Yeah, it's a different story. No, don't ever say that to anybody who writes a sex column.
There's a low-hanging
'Cause that's not what I
insemination
meant.
joke there, and
Yeah,
I'm going to leave it alone.
don't go there. Move on.
And so we were talking to these friends, and they said, you guys should think about adoption. And as we had adopted, and then they said we did an open adoption. I'd never heard that term before. I'm like, what's an open adoption? Well, the birth mother chose us. We have an ongoing relationship, and the birth mothers of both of our kids, they had 2 different birth moms, have legally enforceable visitation rights, and they're involved to a degree that they're comfortable with and we're comfortable with. And I thought that was crazy. My first reaction was, well, they want the kid back, and all the cliches and stereotypes and fears that adoptive parents have about open adoption. And the truth is that when a birth mother who places a child for an adoption, when the only way she can ever see that child again is to get it back, that incentivizes getting it back, trying to have the kid back. And we decided to look into that. We went to a seminar, which was 7 straight couples and us around a conference table in a conference room in a hotel or in a mall in Portland, Oregon, where the very first thing on the very first day is they went around the table and we were the last couple, and each couple in turn had to tell their infertility story. And when it got to us, we were like, I keep inseminating him and nothing. There, I had to do it, right? And the agency had never worked with a gay male couple before, and they warned us that, you know, the waits averaged 9 months to 18 months. They'd had people wait as long as 5 years. They told us maybe 5, maybe 7, because, you know, it was hard for them to picture a birth mother who would choose a gay male couple. And it was hard for us to picture that birth mother too, because they brought birth mothers in during the 2-day seminar, and each one of them said, I want a good Christian home for my baby. And we were sitting there going, and so they said, you know, get your paperwork in and then forget about it and wait. And we'd only been together 2 years. And we thought, okay, so if 5 years from now, we will have been together 7 years.
You'll get a call.
7 years, 9 years, that'll be perfect timing. And we got a call. We were picked 4 weeks later.
Oh, my God.
And had a baby, I think 8 weeks after that.
Oh, my God. I can't even imagine.
So it was very sudden and right, and the right baby. And, you know, we joke, he's 14, almost 15, and giving us hell, but that's what they're supposed to do, but it's still hell, even though you know that's how it's supposed to go. It's still...
Yeah.
Yeah.
hell.
Wow. I'm really looking forward to it.
It gets worse. Then it gets better again, I'm told.
Very excited.
There's so many things I want to talk about, but one thing I definitely want to talk about, because it's obviously a part of this whole open adoption thing, and it really did. It was daunting to me as well, and great. And I believed what people were telling me, but I had no personal experience about it, so I was scared shitless about all the typical cliche things. Will I be able to bond with an adopted babies in the same way that I would if it were genetically mine? And how, what would that feel like? What will it feel like to have someone else's baby in my arms? Like that notion, that misconception, that notion of someone else's baby, like that was something that until I became a parent in this way, it didn't, you know what I mean? It didn't, I would never actually understand that notion of it is my, literally I was in the delivery room, and as the baby was handed to me, all those things went away.
It takes about 5 seconds.
It took 5 seconds.
It's and I hate to reference our work, but it's that scene last night in Scandal where you walked into the nursery and she handed you the baby, and between the moment that she handed you the baby and you looked at the baby, the baby was yours.
That baby.
That baby's so
I have
cute.
to have that baby. Let me tell you something. I have a bond with that baby.
That baby's amazing. Baby's amazing.
I have to say, I
We're
want to jump
obsessed
in
with
and say
babies,
that
sorry.
that wasn't my experience, as I wrote about in The Kid. Terry
Yeah.
had that moment of instant bond meld with the baby, which was a problem for Terry because then he was felt very vulnerable over the 2 days that our
Yeah.
birth mother had
Yeah.
to change her mind and
That's how I
decide
felt.
to keep
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
baby. And I was like, oh, baby. In those,
Yeah.
and it took me, and I think this is true for a lot of parents, and sometimes parents feel that they can't talk about this because this is, I think, more common, your experience, but it's also the affirmed and proper experience of parenting, whether it's a bio kid or an adopted kid, is you have to, like, that instant, and I didn't have that, and some parents don't. And it was going through the motions of parenting that
Yeah.
bonded me as a parent.
That you got, that
To
you sort of
DJ.
fell in love.
Dawn
Yeah.
didn't either.
Yeah, and it took about 9 months, ironically,
Really?
that where I was like changing diapers and doing things, and it was being, and maybe it was a more typically male experience
Yeah.
of parenthood because cliche in our relationship, Terry's kind of the more feminine spirit in our household, which is awesome. I like swishy guys, and I think that's really perhaps a more masculine reaction that I had, which is
This time around, this adoption time around, like I knew what was going to happen to me this time, versus the first time I didn't realize that I was going to walk into the hospital, I was going to take one look at a baby and then be like, oh my God, this baby is mine. And literally feel like if no one was looking, I was going to tuck the baby under my arm and start running.
Yeah.
So this time around, like I had my friend Betsy,
Yeah.
who I said, Betsy, if I call you and say the adoption's not working, no matter what else I say after that, you have to get on a plane and come and get me.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get on a plane and come and get me, I will be like driving across country
Yeah.
with someone else's baby in the
Yeah.
back of my car like a crazy
A
person.
fugitive. Yeah.
Because I felt madly in love, and it's really hard.
But it's important what Dan's saying
But I
as
think
well.
it's true.
You don't have to have that experience. It's
No.
like, this is true about everything. And whatever your experience is the right experience for that process that you're in. I had been resisting and fearful and panicked about the entire thing because we had gone through 6 months of visits from the birth mom and visits with the doctor and phone calls to Wisconsin, and the whole thing felt really strange to me and really scary, and like we won't know until a week after the baby's born if it's really we're going to be parents or not. And Dawn was in this mode like, just get the baby, let's just get our baby. Whatever she asks, it's fine. Let's just get our baby. And we were both exhausted after 6 months of the period of time that we were called on the 3rd month. So we had 6 months of visits and planning and hearing her story, and yes, there were stories where there were calls from prison, and yes, there were some of the more cliche things that don't always happen. I was really resisting the whole thing. Don had such a hard time letting go of the fear that it wouldn't happen, that it took him months after the relinquishment.
But one thing we're not talking about in this whole bonding process is the emotional security, health, rights of the birth mother.
Right.
And if 2 people or 1 person is charging at the birth mother like a mad animal, and I must have this baby, and this
Right.
baby is mine, 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 birth mothers have a right to change their minds once the baby's born, to look at this baby and then make, I think, a free and unencumbered decision about whether they want to parent after all.
Which you want them to make.
Well, I was gonna
Which
say,
you do
and
want to
that's-
make. You don't want to have a child from somebody
No.
who
who
regrets
doesn't-
that
who
decision.
regrets their decision.
That's right.
And I feel like that's the hardest part, because I spent, you know, the part of the time, you know, when you know the baby's coming and you know the birth mother, you know what's going on, really feeling fully bonded with the birth mother. Like for me, I was sort of all about honoring their experience and really feeling the guilt of it benefiting from someone else's pain. Like for me, that's what I kept saying. I felt like I'm benefiting from someone else's pain, and that's not so awesome. You know
And
what
I think
mean?
that's really important in open adoption, because
Yeah.
often in closed adoptions where here comes the social worker with your baby,
Yeah.
you're cut off from all that pain, and you shouldn't be. Giving birth hurts. Adoption should hurt.
Yeah.
There should be some pain there in that sense. And I also feel like I spend that time trying to soak up as much of the birth mother's experience as she'll allow me to have. Because at some point, my child's going to be asking me, and I'm a writer, so I really should be able to tell the story, going to be asking me all kinds of questions that I want to be able to tell her and give her.
Yeah.
And then once the baby's born, I might be madly in love, but what I think makes you so crazy, at least what made me so crazy, is that I could be in the nursery feeding the baby and be madly in love, but when you walk out of the room and you have to go see the birth mother, she's crying.
Yep.
So she's devastated. So you're madly in love, and you've been sort of in love with this poor girl who you've been taking care of,
Yeah.
who's now devastated. And it's a terrible, I mean, like,
It is a terrible
it's a
experience.
terrible, excruciating, and ultimately oddly beautiful experience.
Yeah.
It bonds you to your birth mother.
It
I wrote
does.
about
Yeah.
it in The Kid. There was this moment where she had decided to go through with the adoption. We signed the papers. It was time to leave the hospital. She decided she wanted us to leave first with the baby. Sometimes a birth mother will decide to leave and then let you be there, and she'll go. And you know, it's 15 years ago. I still can't talk about it without crying. And we weren't prepared for this emotionally. I think the agency didn't say anything on purpose. But there's this moment where we had to pick up the baby and take the baby from his mom and walk out of the room. And in our case, our birth mom, Melissa, was sitting with the baby, and the baby was holding her hand. And so when the agency counselor was like, pick up the bassinet and go, from behind her, let go, I had to pick up the bassinet and physically pull them apart. And our birth mom was really stoic and very, a real character and a personality, but very sort of stoic and not very emotionally, very emotionally intelligent and smart, but just not, you know, didn't show a lot. She's a homeless street kid. She's tough. And she dissolved in front of us into sobs. And that moment as an adoptive parent is so important, because one of the emotional needs as an adopted child grows is they want to know their story. And a lot of adopted children will have these, you know, really existential dilemmas about having been thrown away, discarded, not loved by their biological parents, by their families of origin. And as an adoptive parent, to be able to say to my son, as I have said to him, your mother loved you, I was there, I saw it. And it was the hardest thing and the most loving thing that anybody could have done. And what a gift
Yeah.
to be able, as adoptive parents, to give to your child that witness of that moment, that he wasn't thrown away, and he was loved, and it was circumstance only that prevented his biological mother, who loved him so much, from being his in-house parent, and she couldn't be that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good point. I mean, and again, everyone's experience will be completely different. There are birth moms that don't want to be there when you're there. There are birth moms that don't want contact. Some really want contact. I was very threatened by the notion of all of it, and yet very bonded with ours. We had been told about this notion of an entrustment ceremony. Our birth mom really liked the idea. We were both like, oh my God, this is going to be... Because here's the truth. The happiest day in your life could very well be the most tragic for the person that you've been taking care of for the last 6 months. It can be or not, but
It's like somebody donating organs and everything else
Right.
that comes with it.
That's
to
right.
you.
It's really, and there's a blessing happening there, and somebody is doing something unbelievably, the most loving act, really,
Yeah.
by both parties. The most loving act by both parties at that time. And we did this entrustment ceremony, and we videotaped it, and when we thought afterwards, like, this is kind of, we have really mixed emotions, really mixed, complex emotions about the showing of an entrustment ceremony to our kids. And yet, I can imagine a time when they're old enough that they would want to see that. I can't, now they're too little, but it is the moment where they're seeing a person who was very, very involved and loving in her relationship with the two people she, out of love, chose to be the parents of her kid.
And it's very dangerous for you guys as gay parents to show that to your kids, because years from now they're going to look at that video in front of you and go, you're so old now, and you'll be shattered.
Exactly
Daddy,
right.
look
Oh
how
my God.
young you were.
We show them pictures now, and we are old parents. We show them pictures now, and it's punishing. It's like, you were really young. Yes, at some point. I'm curious, at some point I was your age. I'm curious, Shonda, what that's like. You know, there is something interesting about the idea of a birth mom and what happens afterwards. Like, I guess I should put it this way. When I walk around, Dawn and I are walking with our baby, there's no question. We did get asked questions like, where's their mom? Where's their mom? Where's their mom? It's like people just didn't make assumptions. They wanted to know. And those were opportunities to either slug them or tell them, this is a different kind of family, and this is how we became parents, and mind your own business, or not, depending on their tone. And how depending on the mullet, we would respond appropriately. But I think it's interesting.
Or if they said, you're so young to be a father, where's the mom? Then you were totally cool with it.
Right, exactly. Is that your dad too? Yeah, no. Then that's a whole different thing. But I wonder whether you have mixed feelings about wanting to keep your story. It's your story. It's your children's story and your story. And to what degree, when you walk in a park and you've got your two kids, there's no question. Or is there?
You know, it's interesting because there didn't used to be. Harper looks like me.
Yeah.
She looks a lot like me. Her birth mom, oddly enough, my siblings and I, none of us look alike, but we all look like my mom. So if we're all standing next to my mom, you know that we all came from my mom. Her birth mom looks like, if she was standing next to us, she would also look like my mom. So Harper looks like us. So that was never a question or a concern. Emerson does not. She is, as we all know, black people come in many colors. She is a much lighter hue. She has some Asian mixed in there. And people feel really, really comfortable walking directly up to me and saying, what is she? As if we're talking about the pedigree of a dog or something, which I find fascinating. And because she's sitting next to her much darker sister, who is 10 years older, there's sort of a look on people's faces that suggests that I've been having sex with many different men, which is also something that I'm encountering for the first time as a single woman.
Welcome to our world.
But, but it is that thing of that I'm suddenly very aware of as a single black mother. That suddenly people, I'm like, oh, that's what you're thinking in your head. Like, that's what's going on in there. And I've never, I've never made it a secret that I've adopted, and I've never felt like it should be a secret that I've adopted, and I'm perfectly happy. But the what is she question that's then sort of followed by, what's her dad? What's this? What's that? Gets my back up. And I found myself answering in ways that I am not necessarily totally proud of. But I finally settled on my only response, which goes to the response of a lot of questions that you get asked about adoption. Is I just start with, why do you ask? Because sometimes people are asking because they want to know about adoption. And if that's why they're asking, then I'm perfectly happy to tell you.
Right.
But if you're asking for other weirder, creepier, nefarious reasons, then I'm going to put on what I like to call my ghetto hat and unleash something at you.
Oh my God, I wish I had thought. I think I put on your ghetto hat.
The other day.
I wrote in the book a story, which I'm not proud of a time when I was asked, where's their mom? And, you know, on some level that's very rational, I feel like my kid's mom. So don't ask, and some of your, I get my haunches up. And yet it is important, as that story is, and millions of others, it is important to know is, first of all, it's important to tell the story. It's important to tell the truth. It's important to be honest about the story because you're going to be with your kids anyway. You want to be able to tell that story in front of your kids. None of it is shameful. None of it is a threat. You can feel the threat, but it really isn't a threat. And most of the times it's an opportunity, which leads me to, we have not that much time. It leads me to one thing I want to talk about a little bit about this idea of the opportunity. The three of us are really lucky to be in professions or as artists able to have a platform for being able to tell our story or tell stories in general. And believe me, I love hearing stories and I love telling stories, and they lead to things. You know, the inspiration for becoming a parent can come from reading a book or from watching a character on a television show or a movie or
getting really drunk.
Or getting really drunk. The inspiration, or you can have a baby by getting really drunk.
Can I throw something in about the people asking where mom is?
Yeah.
Your story is so much more scalding and horrible and racially charged than it came across in that email exchange that we had about it. But I've had experience, and I think this is distinct to same-sex couples who parent, where people have, like, I've been alone with DJ, particularly when he's an infant or a toddler on my back in a baby backpack, and people said, sometimes to him, right to little 2-year-old DJ, where's your mom? And I once watched a gay couple be asked that question, and one of them, and maybe it was the millionth time they'd been asked and they lost their patience.
It was.
But snap and turn to somebody who asked that question and say, there is no mother. And I thought, unless you have like a cast iron uterus by KitchenAid in your basement, there's a mother. And I think it's really important, and I think the onus is on us as same-sex couples who parent to honor the biological parents or the sperm donor or the birth mother. And it's easy for us because we feel such gratitude to DJ's mom, birth mom, Melissa. But we always, when people say, where's his mom, we say, well, and we unpack it. Yeah. And sometimes the question is, where's your wife? Right. And I say, at home with his dick. Right. Which is a joke, and I say with a big smile on my face, and they look shocked, and then they laugh, and I go, yeah,
that's your ghetto hat. Yeah.
That's my ghetto hat.
That's your ghetto hat.
My ghetto Jimmy cap.
Exactly. Well, but this touches on what I'm talking about. You talk about it. You talk about it in a way that unique to you, have inspired so many. The It Gets Better campaign, the books you write, the what you do, the work you do, political activism, a writer, all the things that you do are with honesty and humor and ultimately inspire. And I am inspired by that. I hope to be able to do that in my own way. I'm not you, and I'm not Shonda. And Shonda in her own way, like I've always been inspired by the way in which a character is drawn and then revealed to an audience. As though the world you're writing, and you said this earlier, and I was sort of psyched about it, because it's the world that either the world that we should be living in, or the world that you know. But you don't, as I've written about as well, like you don't write about someone coming out of the closet. That character, there is no closet. That character is out of the closet. He already, when you are introduced to him, lives out of the closet. Yeah. And then you can move on and talk about the depths of what their relationship is or their desire to be a parent. It's not a question. And I just wondered to what degree that just is part of it, or you feel driven to do that.
I don't know that I feel driven to do it. I think growing up, I think I always felt like when you watched television and you saw things on TV, if there was a black character, then that character could only be one thing, which was good and righteous, and probably talking about being black a lot.
To compensate for every other character that a black person was on TV.
Right, and also because they were generally the only one. And if there was a gay character, then they talked about being gay a lot. And that was all that they were. And as we all know, we're many things, and it's not just that. And if there was a character who had HIV, that's all they talked about. Like, people were issue characters. Unless you were like a white person, you were an issue character. And I found that insulting and strange. And not at all the world that I live in or the world that anybody else lives in. So to me, you just make the world look like the world that we live in. And I don't spend 90% of my time talking about my blackness, and you don't spend 90% of your time sitting around talking about your gayness, like all the time. It's who you are, and it informs who you are and how you live your life, but it's not the conversation you're constantly having.
Thanks for outing me, by the way. Like, that was really disrespectful.
I don't talk about my gayness all the time. Sometimes my mouth is full, and my mother raised me better than that. Right. You don't talk with your mouth full about your gayness, particularly.
Never that, right?
The point of putting adoption in was just, it's a part of my life, and
Yeah.
I felt like I wanted, people to see how amazing it is, and B, people to, I loved reading your book and feeling like somebody was telling me their story and how it was done, and stuff that made me laugh and stuff that made me cry and stuff that made me feel hopeful about the ability to do it. And you're passing that on as far as you can by telling stories on television that make people feel the same way. At least that's what I'm trying to do.
And I think
So-
that sometimes when people ask questions about, where the mother is, or if someone's asking it in the right way, which is not, I mean, sometimes I think people are coming to you and they're genuinely curious but awkward and put their foot in their mouth. But some people are coming to police families and
Yeah.
say what's the right family, what's the wrong family, and how
Right.
families should come together and shouldn't. They want to know how you came together so they can judge you as a good family or a bad family. And those people I want to kick to death. One of the only negative encounters, like I totally forgot this, we had when DJ was very little, is somebody asked us and we said, we're a couple, we adopted. And she looked right at us and said, I don't believe in that. And I looked at her and said, we ain't Tinkerbell. And you don't have to clap. Whether you believe
It's
is
happening.
irrelevant. But telling our stories, particularly when it comes to adoption, because there's so much shame around adoption. There was no such thing as closed adoptions until early in the 20th century. That was invented to protect children from the stigma of illegitimacy, purity culture and all that craziness. And there's a lot of stigma and baggage that built up around adoption because of the closed model and because of the sexual psychosis of the 19th and 20th centuries that we have to burn away. And we burn that away by telling our stories about adoption, because it is normal and natural and beautiful. And it's been going on since parents were being picked off by saber-toothed tigers and somebody had to raise this child left behind.
Right. God, we can go on so many different tangents. I'd like to open it up for a conversation, our conversation, to any questions people might have, and we'll bring
There's
them.
roving microphone.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this. I adopted my daughter, and she's 15 and a half now, so I have an open adoption too. And I kind of got her grandfather's become like my father. My father's dead, so it was like a very unexpected, beautiful thing. But the question that I have for you that I faced a lot was why they put her up for adoption? And that's the question that I'm just curious to
From others?
Yes.
from anybody. Like people that knew, or people that know she's adopted would say to me, why they put her up for adoption?
People ask me that question a lot.
And I'm just interested to hear your response to that question.
I always just say nobody places a child for adoption unless they're in crisis. Birth mothers are people in crisis. That's why they're birth mothers, right?
I love my adoption agency that I advocate for wherever I go, Open Adoption and Family Services. 75% of the women who approach them about doing an adoption don't end up doing adoptions. It's not one of those agencies that's trying to strip women of their biological children to service their clients. The fees are high because they do a lot of counseling for women that don't end up doing adoptions. And the adoptive parents who end up doing adoptions pay for that counseling too. Everybody who approaches OAFS, they get them on Social Security, they get them on healthcare in Oregon and Washington, they get them situated, they get them apartments without the adoptive parents paying for it, so that the person doesn't feel economically obligated to go through with the adoption. And then they say, now make a decision about whether you want to do this adoption or not. I don't know where that came from.
No, but in terms of answering the question as to what leads a person to put a child up,
So
it's not,
for some birth mothers, like not necessarily crisis, still
Yeah.
like it was a crisis for our birth mom, that she was pregnant at the time she was in the place she was in her life. And that's typically what I say was our birth mother couldn't parent and loved this kid enough to know it. And would every
Yeah.
kid who had parents who couldn't parent had that kind of emotional insight?
Yeah.
I think it's almost that simple. It's almost like she loved the child enough to know that she wasn't able at this moment in time to parent.
What do you say? You've been answering this question for 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it varies, but most of the time I do say she wasn't able to provide. They weren't able to provide. The interesting thing is my daughter has siblings, and that are with, well, actually the birth mother does not raise them, but the grandparents do. And you know, I mean, we all went on a cruise last summer, 27 of us, the whole birth family and our family together. We're super close. I mean, it's just absolutely
Which
amazing.
sometimes happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unbelievable experience, but still that question at times really irritates me. I want to just say to people, well, why do you think? You know, I mean, and it's really true, because adoption is that thing where, you know, the happiest day, you know, I suffered until I got my baby, and the day that I stopped suffering was the day that my birth mother started suffering, and she continues to suffer, and that is, it's unfortunate, and I loved what you said. I thought it was a beautiful thing that what you said, because I don't want to, you know, I want her to move on in her life and have her life be better, but it's really not better, and it is what it is, and that is the sad part of it, you know, but it's just, it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic. So thank you.
Oh, you saw one? Sorry.
That's okay.
So I think it's very easy to kind of throw on the ghetto hat when strangers say things to you, and I certainly have no problem doing that myself. But what are ways to kind of address some well-intentioned but maybe very insensitive family members who say things when you tell them that adoption is kind of one of your options, and you just get stuff that you're like, how are we even related? I don't know who you are. And I mean, just seriously, I've heard some ugly things from people who are in my family, and how do you deal with that? Because then I don't want to throw in the ghetto hat for that.
Right. I would anyway. But
They're there to be warned.
that's a really good question. I mean, it's a matter of respect to some degree. I mean, you are creating whoever is getting those questions, whether it's from a family member or not, yes, it's an opportunity to educate someone who just does not understand. But you're growing a family in the way that I mean, there's a million ways to do it. There are family members that don't believe in vitro fertilization, or don't believe that you should use science, or it wasn't meant to be, or there's a lot of different people who have a lot of different opinions about the way.
Sperm donor or surrogacy.
That's right.
Or yeah.
And there are many that believe whatever's God's will is the will, and don't rock the boat, and don't get someone else's baby, and don't use science to do it. And okay, those are opinions. But the bottom line is you know yourself, and you have to be true to that. And if it's a family member, yeah, maybe you're a little bit more sensitive in the way you talk back. But you can also, I think you can also say, you know, it hurts me when you say that, because I just want you to know that this is the way I intend to grow my family. You
will respect and love my family, or you won't be a part of my family.
Right.
We had friends who adopted who are straight, and their parents have money, and every time a grandchild was born, they put $10,000 in a savings account. When they adopted, they put $2,000 in the savings account.
Oh,
Adopted child. And they didn't know what to do, and I said, you know, I ran my mouth and said, what you do is you will never see us or this child again if you don't accept this child as a grandchild, and knock this shit off. And I think as gay people, we were prepped for going to our families and being like, because we'd already done that about the sodomy thing, and saw that when you drew a line and said, you will toe this line or I will not be a part of your life, after giving your family time to grieve and freak out and ask rude questions, which they did when I came out to them, that we were able to do that very clearly again, and the family knew instinctively that, oh yeah, we got to toe that line or Danny will kill us.
It's a really good point. I have to say that I often feel sorry for non-gay people. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it. My heart goes out to all of you.
That's right.
Because
the sad twilight existence of the heterosexual.
There is something that happens when you go through the process of coming out, or telling yourself and telling the world, or learning what your own personal bravery or courage is going to come from, or where your boundaries are, or shutting people out who aren't going to accept you, or whatever that process is. It does, in fact, arm you later on in life to make decisions about yourself and your family that then hopefully will lay the bricks of their understanding what the boundaries are.
So if you're not gay yet,
there's still time. We have a booth.
Before you adopt, it's very, very crucial.
We have a booth in the back. It's called We Do Recruit, in fact.org. And
It gets boy butter.
it gets way better.
I had family members that I was worried about who said some things that I thought were not quite right, and asked some questions that I thought were a little sticky. And I tried really hard to sort of educate and say all the right things, and I was very clear that I was moving forward and that it wasn't a question, and I was concerned, and then suddenly there was a baby in front of everybody, and anything,
fell in love.
and it was crazy. Anything anybody had thought, it was gone.
Totally
It went
true.
out the window.
Yeah.
All bets
In
are
the
off.
face of a tiny person who needed stuff.
You know, my family was so great. I'd been out for a while, years before I met Terry, and I said, this is my spousal equivalent, and they all like treated Terry like he was any other brother-in-law in the family, so that when this kid came along, they treated him like any other grandchild, which was wonderful. What I got from some relatives, which was unexpected, was, are you guys going to raise him gay? You're going to bring him up to be gay? And I looked at them and
my
were
God.
you not there when I was 15 years old? You were there. I remember you. That was the worst thing that you guys did to me, was trying to dictate my sexuality and sexual orientation. Do you think I would be so sadistic as to do to this child what you did to me? That almost drove me to suicide. You think I would do that to my child? The mistake that you guys still apologize for and grieve for? I would turn around and do that? And then they went, oh yeah, right, duh, that was a really stupid thing to say. Yes. Yes, Aunt Peggy, that was a really stupid thing to say.
Hi, I just wanted to first thank you guys all so much for sharing your experiences. I think it really means a lot to the community adoption and as well as infertility when people in the spotlight like yourselves do come and kind of get on this level with us and share your experiences and kind of give us the opportunity to feel validated, and we really appreciate that. Speaking on that note, being that you are in the spotlight, what would you recommend for an infertility advocate? What's a good way for us to work with Hollywood, with celebrities, to kind of get more of that out there, more of the real information? I know as far as adoption goes, the biggest thing I hear from friends of mine that I work with is that they're working on an adoption and everyone says, oh, great, you're trying to adopt. That means you're going to get pregnant soon. You know, there's this
Which
this
is what happened to
great,
my
awesome
friends with the
misconception
two kids
out
in the
there.
one bio.
And you might not have experienced it yourselves, but for infertility patients, it's a big thing. Like, they're ready to move forward with an adoption, and they're moving out of treatment and into adoption, and that's where their focus is. And the community at large, the general public, has this misguided notion that, oh, great, now your real baby, quote, real baby will come along. And it's kind of hurtful. And I love that you guys are here and, kind of helping us through that.
How do you get Hollywood people to tell their stories? How do you stop Hollywood people from telling their stories?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's a way to keep narcissistic, damaged, speaking for myself only, to tell stories. I think this is sort of how we started. It's like each person inspires another person. I think we get each person to not be afraid, to talk about what. I have very high-profile couple friends who have been doing in vitro for a very long time, and their last resort would be adoption. This is the other thing about adoption. It's always someone's last resort. And by the way, listen, I don't begrudge anybody who's married and wants to become a parent, and they go through the process of how they want to see themselves become parents. And I will always say to them, don't, even while you're trying, there are children out there. Your baby is out there, and go get it, have it. And many times they go and adopt a baby, and afterwards they have a child biologically. That happens more times than you can imagine. But I do think that hopefully the more of us that continue to put it in our work, it will continue to make people want to talk about it. I certainly can't shut the hell up.
I just also want to thank you guys for your honesty and humor and talking about this really very emotional. I got so emotional when you were talking about the mother who is so sad, and that's your happy day and that's their sad day. So thank you for that. And the question I have is, at what point did you tell your children, and is there something about oh, it's a good age to tell your child, and how do you tell a child? I was really curious about that.
DJ, you are not our biological son.
Done.
You are not the miracle butt baby of 16th Avenue.
I will address this because I think this really only kind of applies to me in that sense. I actually, because someone said to me early on, your children will learn how to react to this based on how you react. So if you're all freaked out about it and stressed out, they will be. So when Harper was, I want to say like 2 days old, I started telling her she was adopted. Mainly because I felt like before she figured out what the heck I was saying, I wanted to be super comfortable with it. So I would like hold her and come up with like different ways to like tell her story, like while she was super young. And so that literally like, I think by 3 weeks in I'd settled on like sort of and every once in a while I'd say, I'm so glad we got adopted. So that by the time she was 3 or 4, it was a thing that I just said every once in a while. And, you know, I'd read all the prerequisite adoption books, but it was a thing that I said every once in a while, and then just answered whatever questions she asked as she asked them, like answered whatever she asked as she asked it. And sooner or later, like it was just a part of her life, so that it was never a thing that I had to sit her down and tell her. It was a thing that she always knew, and the levels of what she knew change as she gets older and she asks more questions and her understanding grows. But I've been saying to her in various really awkward ways when she was a baby, but as she got older, better and better, you know, I'm so glad we got adopted, or, you know, yes, you have a birth mother, or whatever it was she asked. And it got so that because I had said it so much when she was a baby and I was so cool with it, by the time she was asking really hard questions, I could answer those questions with like a very calm demeanor and not get all freaked out and not get my tense face on, which would freak her out.
Yeah, we likewise told the story of our child coming into our lives from a very young age, and we'll continue to add to it as their understanding of how that kind of thing can happen grows. I did realize after after 2.5 or 3 years, we had not ever actually used the word adopt or adoption. Like, we had told the story, and you know, we have this woman named Nikki, and you came out of her tummy, and it's a great little story, but we hadn't actually used the word. And I looked at Don and I was like, you realize we never said the word? And by not saying the word, why are we avoiding it? It just never came up. But then we've really we've demystifying the word, the word is as important as anything else.
For our son, the most, oh, sorry. No. For our son, the most, should I, shut up?
Go.
For our son, the most interesting part of that process of answering his questions as they come up, always had acknowledged he was adopted. Our birth mother, early in his life, was around a bit. We would see her. Her existence was always acknowledged, and her role in making his family happen. But around 3 or 4, he started having these, like, what if my best friend Carson's parents had adopted me? What if Melissa had picked them? Then we'd be brothers. And, I think it's often true for adopted children that they latch into sort of the existential randomness of the universe earlier than the rest of us do. And we all do eventually.
Yeah.
And it was answering those questions that I found to be really challenging.
That's interesting. A lot of really hard questions came up for us when I was adopting again. Harper it was like, that was when I realized that there was stuff she just wasn't getting.
Right.
She was, because she said to me, can we go to the adoption and get a Chinese boy? And I was like, adoption's not a place. Like, suddenly I was like, we really have to start over.
There's no drive-through at
it's
adoption.
It's not a drive-through. Like, we don't just pick it was interesting.
So, obviously we have a worldwide audience watching online via Ustream, and we have questions on Twitter and Facebook. So maybe a little bit more fun question related to something asked earlier. Is it easier or more difficult to play James on Scandal given your personal story, Dan?
It's easier. I mean, I feel extremely blessed that that there is a parallel. Not that I'm a journalist, or not that I'm trying to
method.
Not that I'm trying to bring down anybody or trying to expose any kind of political scandal, but I do feel very lucky that at this stage of my life right now, the actor that I am is able to experience a lot of what I have and what I did and what I am in real life in this character. It makes it much more, I don't know how, the answer is yes. It's much, much easier and much more rewarding. I feel very close to the character. Such an actory thing to say. I hate myself. Go ahead.
Which is the most actory thing to say.
And that's the most actory thing to say.
So perhaps a more difficult question, I'm not sure. There's a couple of people that have asked different ways, basically around finances, which has come up a lot in different things today. So obviously, you've a different experience than probably most people, I think it's fair to say. Does that make you feel more or less obligated to donate to any charities? Are there any that you would want to mention here today? Ways that maybe allow people to have access to creating their own family?
Childhaven.org is a wonderful charity that provides for foster children who are needy and in crisis. And doing a private adoption is expensive. No doubt, hands down. There's a lot of kids in the system who need parents, and foster to adopt. I have friends who fostered to adopt. Is one way to go about it. But a lot of agencies, crunchy granola agencies like Open Adoption and Family Services, work really hard to assist couples who don't have tons of money. And Terry and I at the time didn't have tons of money. We still don't. To make sure that it is possible even for couples. You can basically do an adoption on layaway some places.
Yeah. It shouldn't stop you. And the answer is yes. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of organizations, the Evan Donaldson Adoption Institute, Families Like Us, there's many. The Family Equality Council, who is sponsoring this conversation today, which I want to thank them for that. But there are a lot of organizations out there. I'm involved in many of them, but I don't think that, yes, a certain kind of adoption can be very expensive, but it's not the only way. And in fact, I just read a statistic that if 1 out of every 3rd family in a church in this country would adopt, it would, all the kids, there wouldn't be any kids waiting for adoption currently. And that a very high percentage of families.
And then prom comes around and we're back.
And then we're back to where we started. It'll start
it's cyclical.
So if we could just do one last social media question, just some first a diversity of questions. So we're assuming that you guys have talked about this prior, or maybe you can talk about it now. Your approach to researching how to adopt, was it different for each of you or similar, particularly with the difference between Shonda being a straight woman and the two Dans with their own individual stories having different journeys at different times in our society?
I think it was the same.
It was similar?
The same. We all.
So where did you start?
We read The Kid.
And figured if they'd give a kid to me, they'd give a kid to anybody.
Vista Del Mar Family Services was an adoption agency in Los Angeles that we found an incredible resource. We hired an attorney that had been recommended to us by someone. But that's what I mean. You got to tell people you want to adopt. It shouldn't be a secret. You post it on Facebook. I learned that many adoptions happen because someone knows someone who knows someone whose sister, she got pregnant and she doesn't. I mean, a lot of times the adoption happens because you were willing to talk about your desire, and it happens that way. But
yeah, a lot of it was just telling everybody you knew that you were interested in adopting, and that somehow somebody said, "Well, I know a lawyer, and I know this person," and then that introduced you to somebody else who introduced you to somebody else.
It takes
I didn't
one
research
phone
it though.
call.
We were very irresponsible in a way. Like our friends said, "This is our agency," and we went, and the skids were cosmically greased for us.
Well, it's one phone call though. I keep saying make the first phone call, because the lawyer you get in touch with is going to tell you the entire process. The agency you call is going to lay it out for you, or the Adoption Institute.
And it takes time, and you have to be chill, or you'll go crazy.
Yeah.
You have to be, if you're thinking about adoption, the most important thing is to, and I'm not a spiritual person at all, you really kind of have to be zen about it.
But you know
the baby that you adopt is the baby you were supposed to adopt, and it arrives when it arrives and not a moment before.
The woman who runs, Jane Aronson, who runs the Worldwide Orphans Fund, which is another actually awesome organization, told me this, which I thought was just the best piece of advice ever. If you're thinking about adopting, if you're just thinking about it, start. Get in line. Call somebody, start taking the classes, do your home study, get in line, because that part takes a while. So while you're busy figuring it out and thinking, you can already be in line so that something can be happening, versus waiting until you've already made your decision and then 2 years have passed and then you get in line and then maybe it's 2 more years until you get a baby. She's just said get in line to get a baby as fast as possible.
Which is what we did, hoping we'd get a baby at 5 years.
I know. Be careful.
4 weeks.
But I agree. Thank you very much.
Excuse me one sec. I've been handed the mic and told I could say a quick word. I'm Adam Pertman, head of the Donaldson Adoption Institute. Thank you, Dan, for the plug. Just a very quick thing that will resonate with all of you. You know, you go through years and years sometimes of infertility treatment, and you're willing to do it and keep going, and then we enter, the word adoption enters in our heads, and we think, how come it's not happening faster? You know, we somewhere in our minds, we think there's the right way to do it, and therefore we'll put everything we can into it. And then there's the second choice, and we want it to get done fast. And so I just want to second what other Dan said. Patience is really okay. The really nice thing about adoption, however you do it, is if you stick with it, eventually you're going to have a family.
And we're out of time.
Okay, and on that note, I'm Kim Bergman, and I want to thank our sponsor for this event, Family Equality Council. Also thank Ustream for recording all the programs. Also, I'd like to thank the live and online audience for joining, and you can share your ongoing views and continue the conversation on Twitter or Facebook at #FPS13. And finally, I invite you to join me in thanking this wonderful panel for this really wonderful, informative conversation.
What you're asked about, what is she, is so effing racist that I don't know how you...
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today in today's sessions. Just a reminder that sessions begin tomorrow morning again at 10:30. The exhibit hall opens at 10 o'clock, and we look forward to seeing you then.